My 18th birthday didn't come with cake candles or celebrations. It came with a black town car idling in our gravel driveway, and my stepmother shoving a leather suitcase into my hands. For years, the Montgomery family had demanded a bride to honor an ancient blood-soaked debt. It was supposed to be her precious daughter, Chloe. Instead, Beatrice forged the registry, trading my life to a crippled vampire king to spare her own flesh and blood. I thought I was being sent to die. I was wrong. The rain in Seattle hasn't stopped for 3 days, casting a permanent dreary twilight over the city. It was fitting considering the mood inside the Harrington household on the morning of my 18th birthday. I woke up to the sound of deadbolts locking. When I made it down the grand mahogany staircase of our historic Queen Anne home, I didn't find a birthday breakfast. Instead, I found Beatrice, my stepmother, sitting rigidly at the head of the dining table. Her posture was flawless, her designer blazer immaculate, but her hands were trembling slightly as she clutched a porcelain teacup. Standing behind her, refusing to meet my eyes, was Chloe. My stepsister was pale, her usually perfectly curled blonde hair tied back in a messy knot, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Sit down, Clara," Beatrice commanded, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. It was a tone I had grown accustomed to since my father, William Harrington, passed away under mysterious circumstances 5 years ago. I remained standing, my eyes darting to the heavy leather suitcase sitting by the front door. "What is going on? Where are you sending me?" Beatrice set her teacup down with a sharp clink. "We are honoring the Accord of 1999. The Montgomery family has called in their debt." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Every human in the Pacific Northwest knew about the Accord. Decades ago, when the existence of vampires was violently revealed to the world, peace was only established through harsh treaties. The Montgomerys were the most powerful vampire syndicate on the West Coast. They controlled the ports, the politicians, and the blood banks. In exchange for not hunting humans in the streets, prominent families were occasionally required to offer up a companion, a lifetime blood slave and bride to solidify alliances. "The debt is real," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "But the registry names the firstborn daughter of the current matriarch. That's Chloe, not me." Chloe let out a muffled sob, burying her face in her hands. Beatrice stood up, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "Chloe is fragile. She is destined for a life of high society, for a proper marriage to a senator or a CEO. She would not survive a week in the Montgomery estate. You, on the other hand, have always been resilient, much like your stubborn father." "You forged the registry," I whispered, the sheer audacity of her betrayal washing over me. "You altered the city records. You're sending me to Silas Montgomery." Silas Montgomery wasn't just a vampire. He was the king of the Northwest Court, but he was also a ghost. 2 years ago, rumors swept through the city that he had been severely maimed in a territorial war with a rogue faction from Canada. Whispers claimed he was shattered, crippled, and completely disfigured. He hadn't been seen in public since. They said his mind had fractured along with his body, turning him into a volatile, bloodthirsty monster who locked himself away in his ancestral estate. "I did what I had to do to protect my family," Beatrice said, coldly crossing the room to hand me a thick manila envelope. "Inside are your new identification papers, the transfer of your guardianship, and a signed NDA. The town car is outside. If you try to run, the Montgomery enforcers will hunt you down, and they won't be gentle about it." "He'll know," I shot back, tears of anger finally spilling hot down my cheeks. "Vampires can smell a lie. He'll know I'm not your blood daughter." "He doesn't care whose blood it is as long as the debt is paid," Beatrice sneered. "Silas is a broken creature. He needs a caretaker, a blood bag, a distraction. You will serve him, Clara, and in return, the Harrington family remains untouched." I looked at Chloe. She was my age, a girl I had shared a bathroom with, someone I had covered for when she sneaked out to parties. "Chloe," I pleaded, my voice cracking, "are you really going to let her do this?" Chloe looked up, her blue eyes swimming with cowardly tears. "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm so sorry. I can't go there. I can't be with a monster. I'd die. You're stronger than me. You always have been. There was no rescue coming. I was 18 today, legally an adult, but stripped of all my rights by a treaty older than I was. My father's wealth, his house, his legacy, all of it belonged to Beatrice. And now she was throwing me to the wolves to save her own skin." I grabbed the heavy envelope from Beatrice's hand, my knuckles turning white. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look at them again. I walked to the front door, grabbed the handle of the leather suitcase, and stepped out into the freezing Seattle rain. The driver, a towering man with pale skin and dark sunglasses, despite the overcast sky, opened the back door. As the car pulled away from the only home I had ever known, I watched the Harrington estate disappear into the fog. I wasn't crying anymore. The betrayal had burned the tears away, leaving behind a cold, hardened resolve. I was walking into the lair of a crippled monster, but I promised myself one thing: I would not die quietly. The drive took 3 hours, winding deep into the dense, ancient forests of the Olympic Peninsula. The towering pine trees formed a dark canopy over the winding asphalt, suffocating the last remnants of daylight. When we finally arrived, the Montgomery estate loomed out of the fog like a Gothic fortress. It was a massive structure of dark stone, steep spires, and ivy-choked walls perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the churning Pacific Ocean. The car stopped at the front steps. Before I could even reach for the door handle, it was pulled open by a distinguished older man in a tailored three-piece suit. He had silver hair, sharp cheekbones, and an unnerving stillness to his posture. "Miss Harrington," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "I am Thomas Hayes, the seneschal of this estate. Please come inside. The rain is unforgiving today." I stepped out, clutching my suitcase. "You know who I am?" "We know you are the bride sent to fulfill the accord," Thomas replied, though his eyes, a startling shade of amber, flickered with a brief, unreadable emotion. "Follow me. Your arrival is expected, though not entirely celebrated." The interior of the estate was a jarring contradiction. The architecture was breathtakingly historical: vaulted ceilings, massive crystal chandeliers, and centuries-old tapestries. But seamlessly integrated into the grand Gothic design were modern clinical modifications. The grand staircase had a sleek, customized mechanical lift attached to the railing. Hallways were extra wide, the heavy oak doors outfitted with automated push-plate sensors. The scent in the air wasn't just ancient dust and wood smoke. There was a faint metallic tang of antiseptics and raw blood. "The king's condition," Thomas said quietly, noticing me taking in the modifications. "It is not a secret, though the extent of it is heavily guarded. You will speak of it to no one outside these walls. Do you understand?" "I don't plan on speaking to anyone," I muttered. "I'm a prisoner." "You are a guest, bounded by duty," Thomas corrected gently. "There is a difference. Wait here in the library. He will see you now." Thomas opened a set of double doors, ushering me into a cavernous library that smelled of old paper and burning embers. A massive fireplace crackled at the far end of the room. Facing the fire, with his back to me, was a large, high-backed motorized wheelchair. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stood in the center of the Persian rug, clutching my hands together so tightly my nails dug into my palms. "Beatrice Harrington is a coward," a voice rasped from the chair. The voice sent a shiver down my spine. It was deep, gravelly, and laced with absolute authority, but beneath the surface I could hear a faint tremor, the sound of someone suppressing immense physical agony. The wheelchair slowly pivoted. Silas Montgomery, the feared vampire king, was not at all what I expected. He wasn't an ancient, rotting corpse, nor was he the flawless, statuesque predator depicted in movies. He was devastatingly handsome, but brutally ruined. The left side of his face was flawless, with sharp aristocratic features, a strong jaw, and a piercing, icy blue eye. But the right side of his face and neck was a landscape of horrific, jagged scar tissue. It looked as though he had been burned from the inside out, the skin stretched and violently discolored. His right eye was milky and blind. He wore a loose-fitting black silk shirt, and I could see the outline of heavy bracing underneath it, holding his shattered spine together. A thick woolen blanket was draped over his legs. He looked at me, his one good eye scanning me from head to toe with predatory intelligence. "You don't smell like fear," Silas noted, gripping the armrests of his chair. His knuckles were bone white. "You smell like anger and rain. You aren't the pampered firstborn. You aren't Chloe." "I'm Clara," I said, lifting my chin. "My stepmother forged the documents. She traded me to save her daughter." I expected him to explode. I expected the monster the rumors warned about. Instead, Silas let out a harsh, barking laugh that turned into a wet, agonizing cough. He leaned forward, gasping for breath, his chest heaving. I took an instinctive step forward to help him, but he shot a hand up, freezing me in place. "Do not touch me!" He snarled, his fangs descending with a sharp click. I froze my breath, catching in my throat. "So the great Beatrice Harrington sends me her unwanted baggage," Silas sneered, his chest still heaving as he regained his composure. "She thinks I am so far gone, so pathetic, that I wouldn't notice the bait and switch. Tell me, Clara, did she tell you why my council demanded a bride? To honor the accord, a blood slave, a companion." Silas's lip curled in disgust. "My council is composed of archaic fools. They look at me, their king, confined to this electric throne, and they see weakness. They demanded I take a human bride to project an image of stability to the Canadian factions. To show them I can still sire, still rule, still command the old traditions. I didn't want a bride. I wanted to be left to rot in peace." He aggressively pushed a joystick on his chair, rolling closer to me. The sheer size of him, even seated, was intimidating. He tilted his head, inhaling deeply. "You were sent here as a sacrificial lamb," he murmured, his one icy blue eye locking onto mine. "But your blood, there is something strange about your blood, Clara. It doesn't smell like a normal human's." "I don't know what you mean," I said, stepping back. "We will find out," he said dismissively, pressing a button on his armrest. The library doors opened and Thomas appeared instantly. "Show the girl to the east wing. She is not to leave the floor without an escort." And Thomas, "Yes, sire. Lock the doors from the outside tonight. The pain is going to be bad. I don't want her wandering into my sights when I lose my mind." My first week at the Montgomery estate was a masterclass in isolation. I was given a lavish suite in the east wing, complete with a massive four-poster bed, a clawfoot tub, and a balcony overlooking the jagged cliffs and crashing waves below. My meals were brought to me by Thomas, who was always impeccably polite but gave away nothing. I didn't see Silas once, but I heard him. Vampires were supposed to have accelerated healing. They were immortal, practically invulnerable to human ailments. But every night around 2 a.m., the massive stone walls of the estate would echo with the sounds of destruction, glass shattering, heavy furniture being thrown, and beneath it all the raw, guttural groans of a creature in absolute, unadulterated torment. It terrified me at first. I would hide under the heavy down comforter, waiting for the heavy footsteps of a monster coming to claim his blood debt, but he never came. By the 7th day, the isolation and curiosity outweighed my fear. I wasn't just a captive. I was an intruder in a house of secrets, and I needed to understand the game I was forced to play. That afternoon, while Thomas was managing a delivery at the front gates, I slipped out of the east wing. The estate was deadly quiet. I navigated the labyrinthine hallways until I found the west wing Silas's private quarters. The heavy double doors were slightly ajar. I held my breath and slipped inside. The room was vast and dark, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tightly to block out the weak afternoon sun. The place was a wreck. Antique chairs were splintered into kindling. A massive mahogany desk was cracked down the middle, and sitting in the center of the destruction, slumped in his wheelchair, was Silas. He was bare-chested, his head thrown back against the leather headrest, eyes closed. Without his shirt, the true extent of his injuries was horrifyingly clear. The jagged scar tissue from his face trailed down his neck, covering his right shoulder and half of his chest. But worse than the scars were the dark, pulsing veins that spider-webbed across his pale skin. They were black, unnatural-looking, less like blood vessels and more like creeping roots of rot. On a small silver tray next to him sat a velvet box containing several glass syringes filled with a viscous, glowing blue liquid. "If you are going to sneak up on a vampire," Silas said without opening his eyes, his voice a dry rasp, "you should learn to control your heartbeat. It sounds like a bass drum in this room." I jumped, my instinct screaming at me to run, but I forced my feet to stay planted. "I heard you last night. You're in pain." He finally opened his one good eye, fixing me with a glare that could freeze boiling water. "Astute observation, little bride. Now get out. Vampires don't get sick." I pushed, taking a cautious step forward, my eyes glued to the black, rotting veins on his chest. "You heal. Even if you were in a war, your spine should have healed by now. Your skin should have healed." Silas's hand shot out with terrifying speed, grabbing the armrest. In a blur of motion, the wheelchair propelled forward, pinning me against a heavy oak bookshelf. He was right in front of me, his face inches from mine. The smell of cedar copper and something incredibly toxic rolled off him. "You think this is battle damage?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. "You think a werewolf or a rogue vampire did this to me?" I don't know," I stammered, my back pressed flat against the wood. "It's a neurotoxin," Silas said, his gaze piercing through me. "A synthetic, biochemically engineered poison, specifically designed to break down immortal cells, halt our regenerative abilities, and slowly, agonizingly turn my nervous system into liquid fire." He reached over to the silver tray, picking up one of the syringes. "This is a serum. It slows the decay, but it doesn't cure it. The venom is still in my blood. And do you want to know the most fascinating part, Clara?" I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. "The toxin was engineered by a human," he said, his voice dropping an octave heavy with accusation. "A brilliant, twisted human biochemist who specialized in studying immortal blood. A man named William Harrington." My blood ran cold. The room spun. "My father," I whispered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. Silas leaned back slightly, his expression morphing from rage to a cold, calculated mask. "Your father. The man who was supposedly killed in a lab accident 5 years ago. My enforcers tracked the origin of the poison to his old research files. Files that your dear stepmother Beatrice mysteriously inherited and sold to the highest bidder on the black market. The puzzle pieces clicked together in my mind with sickening clarity. Beatrice hadn't just traded me to save Chloe. She had traded me because I was William Harrington's biological daughter. I was the last living link to his research. "You think I'm an assassin?" I realized the horror washing over me. "You think Beatrice sent me here to finish the job?" Silas looked at me, his icy blue eyes searching my face for any hint of deception. "Are you—" "My father loved me," I said fiercely, pushing away from the bookshelf, my fear entirely replaced by defensive rage. "He wouldn't create a weapon for murderers. And if Beatrice sold his work to poison you, she did it without my knowledge. She hates me. She sent me here hoping you would kill me." Silas stared at me in silence for a long, suffocating moment. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Suddenly, a violent spasm ripped through his body. He gritted his teeth, a low snarl escaping his throat as his hands clamped down on his legs. The black veins on his chest seemed to pulse and darken. He was losing control of the pain again. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grabbing the syringe of blue liquid from his trembling hand. "What are you doing?" he roared, trying to push me away, but his right arm gave out devoid of strength. "Helping you, you stubborn idiot!" I yelled back. I uncapped the needle, found a clear vein on his unscarred left arm, and plunged it in, depressing the plunger. Silas gasped, his head falling back against the chair. For a minute, the only sound in the room was his ragged, uneven breathing. Slowly, the black veins receded slightly, and the violent tension in his muscles relaxed. He opened his eye and looked at me, really looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. The hatred was gone, replaced by a profound, confused vulnerability. "Why did you do that?" he asked softly. "Because I'm not my stepmother," I replied, standing my ground. "And because if my father's research did this to you, then I'm going to find a way to fix it." The game had completely changed. I wasn't just a captive bride anymore. I was the only one who could save the Vampire King from dying, and in return, he might be the only one powerful enough to help me exact my revenge on Beatrice. The negotiation with Silas took exactly 3 minutes. I expected a tyrant, but I found a tactician. Once I explained that my father kept shadow ledgers of his research hidden from the University of Washington's official servers, Silas saw the logic, but he refused to let me go alone. 2 nights later, I found myself back in a black SUV speeding down Interstate 5 towards Seattle. The rain lashed against the tinted windows, blurring the neon lights of the city skyline. I wasn't alone. In the driver's seat was Thomas, his posture as rigid as ever. Beside me sat Gideon, the Montgomery Syndicate's chief enforcer. Gideon was terrifying, 6'4", built like a heavyweight boxer with neck tattoos that peeked out from the collar of his tailored charcoal suit. He hadn't spoken a single word since we left the estate. "We have a 30-minute window," Thomas announced as we exited toward Pioneer Square, the historic cobblestone heart of old Seattle. "The local factions know the king is weakened. If they realize you are his bride, they will take you to force his hand." "They won't know," I said, zipping up my dark raincoat. We pulled into a narrow alley behind a dilapidated brick building on Occidental Avenue. It used to be a maritime shipping warehouse before my father leased the basement under a shell corporation, Biotech Solutions. According to the police reports, the lab had been cleared out by hazardous materials teams after his accident. Beatrice had sold the patents, the equipment, everything she could get her manicured hands on. Gideon picked the industrial lock in seconds. The heavy metal door creaked open, exhaling the stale scent of ozone dust and dried chemicals. Thomas stayed by the entrance, his amber eyes scanning the dark alley, while Gideon followed me down the concrete stairwell. The lab was a graveyard of broken glass and stripped wire. Beatrice's buyers had been thorough. Desks were overturned, server racks were gutted, and the sterilization chambers were smashed. "There's nothing here," Gideon finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "They stripped it to the copper." "My father was paranoid," I replied, walking past the ruined workstations. "He knew Beatrice was snooping around his accounts months before he died. He wouldn't leave his life's work on a standard hard drive." I walked toward the far end of the room, stopping in front of a massive, rusted industrial circuit breaker panel. It looked like it had been there since the 1920s, covered in warning labels and thick layers of grime. I closed my eyes, recalling a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I was 12. My father had given me a paintbrush and told me to help him make the new safe look exactly like the old electrical box. I reached under the bottom edge of the panel, feeling for the small, recessed biometric scanner he had installed. I pressed my thumb against it. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a faint green light flickered, and a quiet click echoed in the silent basement. The heavy metal panel swung open, revealing a pristine, temperature-controlled safe, holding a single silver external hard drive and a stack of leather-bound journals. Got it, I breathed, grabbing the drive and shoving the journals into my backpack. Before I could turn around, Gideon violently shoved me to the ground. The deafening crack of a suppressed gunshot shattered the silence, a bullet sparking against the concrete exactly where my head had been a second before. "We have company," Gideon snarled, his fangs dropping as his eyes bled into a pitch-black void. 4 men in tactical black gear rappelled down the old elevator shaft, assault rifles raised. They weren't police, they weren't university security. They had the cold, mechanical precision of private mercenaries. Beatrice's buyers, or whoever she sold the poison to, had been monitoring the site. "Take the girl, kill the vampire," the lead mercenary barked. I scrambled under a heavy steel table, clutching my backpack to my chest. I expected a shootout. Instead, I witnessed the brutal, terrifying reality of a vampire unleashed. Gideon moved faster than the human eye could track. He didn't use a gun. He was a weapon himself. He crossed the room in a blur, effortlessly lifting the first mercenary by the throat and snapping his neck with a sickening crunch. Gunfire erupted, the noise deafening in the enclosed concrete space. Bullets tore into Gideon's back, ruining his suit, but he didn't even flinch. He threw the dead man into 2 others, knocking them to the floor before leaping onto the final shooter, tearing the man's throat out with his bare teeth. The scent of fresh blood hit the air, thick and metallic. "Clara, move!" Thomas's voice cracked like a whip from the top of the stairs. He was laying down covering fire with a sleek handgun. I crawled out from under the table, slipping on the slick, bloody floor, and sprinted for the stairs. Gideon grabbed the collar of my coat, practically throwing me up the last few steps. We burst into the rainy Seattle alley and dove into the SUV. Thomas slammed on the gas, the tires screaming against the wet asphalt as we tore out of Pioneer Square, leaving the wreckage behind. I sat in the back seat, shaking uncontrollably, clutching the hard drive. I had the answers, but for the first time I truly understood the violent, unforgiving world Beatrice had sold me into. We arrived back at the Montgomery estate just before dawn. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me exhausted, bruised, and soaked to the bone. But I bypassed my bedroom in the East Wing and marched straight to the library. Silas was waiting. He looked worse than he had 2 days ago. The synthetic serum I had injected him with was wearing off. The black rotting veins had crept further up his neck, and a sheen of cold sweat coated his pale face. Yet when I walked in, he straightened in his wheelchair, attempting to mask his agony behind a wall of regal authority. "You're bleeding," he said immediately, his one good eye locking onto a nasty scrape on my forehead from diving under the table. "I'm fine. We got it," I said, pulling the silver hard drive and the leather journals from my bag. I slammed them onto the mahogany desk. "Beatrice's friends tried to kill us, but Gideon took care of them." Silas's jaw tightened. "If they are watching the lab, they know you survived. The timeline has accelerated." Thomas brought in an encrypted, heavily secured laptop. For the next 6 hours, as the sun rose and the estate went into lockdown mode for the day, Silas and I sat side by side, combing through my father's life. It was surreal. Despite the terrifying monster he was reputed to be, Silas possessed a brilliant analytical mind. He understood the complex biochemical formulas my father had written better than I did. As we worked, the physical distance between us vanished. We leaned over the same screen, our shoulders brushing. I could feel the cold radiating from his skin, but there was a strange, undeniable comfort in his proximity. He never looked at me with the cold indifference Beatrice had, nor the predatory hunger I expected. He looked at me with respect. "Here," Silas rasped, pointing a scarred finger at a file titled Project Aegis. "Your father didn't create the toxin to kill vampires. He created it as a containment protocol, a way to paralyze rogue immortals without destroying them. But the formula was altered." I read the screen, my heart sinking. "Beatrice didn't just sell it. Whoever bought it weaponized it. They removed the stabilizing agent. It's eating your nervous system alive." "Can it be reversed?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed pain. I frantically flipped through one of the leather journals until I found a page covered in hasty, frantic handwriting. My father's final notes before his death. I read it, and the blood drained from my face. "Yes," I whispered, "but the stabilizing agent, it's not a chemical, it's a biological enzyme. Explain it to me, Clara." I looked up at him, tears welling in my eyes. My father was terrified someone would steal his work, so he built a genetic lock into the cure. The only way to synthesize the antidote is to bind the base chemicals with an enzyme naturally produced in his own bloodline. Silas stared at me, the realization washing over his scarred features. "Your blood? We have to extract it. If we synthesize my blood with the raw materials in your medical bay, we can create the cure." "No," Silas said, immediately, his voice absolute. He pushed his wheelchair back from the desk. "Read the next paragraph, Clara. Read what the extraction process does." I looked down at the journal. My father's handwriting was shaking on the page. "The required volume of the enzyme is massive. Synthesizing the cure would require draining the host of nearly 70% of their blood volume. The procedure is almost certainly fatal to a human." "I won't do it," Silas snarled, gripping the armrests. "I will not drain you dry to save my own life." You don't have a choice, I argued, stepping toward him. If you die, the Montgomery Syndicate falls, the treaty collapses, and Beatrice and her buyers win. I am a king, he roared, the sheer force of his voice vibrating the crystal chandelier above us. I am not a parasite. I have spent 2 years rotting in this chair. Clara and I have accepted my death. I will not let my legacy be that I murdered an innocent 18-year-old girl who was brave enough to stand up for me. The silence that followed was deafening. He was breathing heavily, the black veins pulsing furiously against his throat. The agony in his single blue eye wasn't just physical anymore. It was the profound torment of a man who had finally found a sliver of hope, only to realize the price was too high to pay. Silas, I whispered, reaching out to touch his unscarred cheek. He flinched at the contact, unused to gentleness, but he didn't pull away. His skin was freezing, but my hand was warm enough for both of us. Before I could speak, the massive oak doors of the library flew open. Thomas stood there, his usually immaculate suit rumpled, a deep gash across his cheek, dripping crimson blood onto his collar. Sire, Thomas gasped, his amber eyes wide with panic. The perimeter has been breached. The security codes were bypassed from the inside. We have a traitor. The heavy steel shutters of the estate's windows slammed down with a mechanized thud, plunging the library into twilight. The wail of the emergency sirens cut through the grand halls, a sharp, shrieking sound that meant only one thing: the Montgomery stronghold was under siege. Who? Silas demanded, instantly shifting from a broken man to a warlord. He hit a sequence of buttons on his chair, and a hidden panel in the desk popped open, revealing an array of heavy silver weaponry. One of the inner council, Thomas spat, chambering around into his sidearm. Lord Sterling's faction. They disabled the UV grid and opened the southern gates. The Canadian rogues are pouring in. They are being led by Dominic. Silas's eye narrowed. Dominic was a ruthless upstart from the Vancouver territories, a vampire known for leaving nothing but ash and bone in his wake. Whoever bought my father's poison had hired Dominic to finish the job, knowing Silas was too weak to defend his throne. Secure the east wing. Hold the grand staircase, Silas commanded. Gideon takes the front line. Do not let them reach this floor. Yes, sire, Thomas bowed deeply, a gladiator accepting his final orders, and sprinted out, locking the heavy library doors behind him. Clara, get into the safe room, Silas ordered, pointing toward a concealed door behind a massive tapestry. Now, I'm not leaving you. I cannot walk, Clara. I cannot fight, Silas yelled, frustration and fury radiating from him. As if to prove his point, a violent spasm racked his body. The neurotoxin, agitated by his surging adrenaline, flared with unprecedented violence. He let out a gut-wrenching groan, sliding sideways in his chair, clutching his chest as the black veins visibly spread toward his heart. The sounds of battle echoed up through the floorboards, the sickening crunch of stone, the roar of vampires tearing into each other, and the staccato bursts of gunfire. The estate was falling. Then the library doors shattered, wood splintered like matchsticks, as a figure casually stepped through the wreckage. He was tall, dressed in a sleek white trench coat that was already stained with blood. He had cruel, mocking eyes, and a smile that made my stomach churn. Knock, knock, your majesty, Dominic purred, stepping over the debris. 2 massive rogue vampires flanked him, their fangs fully descended. Look at you, the great Silas Montgomery, strapped to a battery-powered wheelchair, rotting from the inside out. Silas tried to push himself up, his fangs bared in a feral snarl, but his arms trembled and gave out. The toxin had completely paralyzed his lower spine. And who is this? Dominic sneered, turning his dark eyes toward me. The human bride. Beatrice Harrington did say she sent us a parting gift. I think I'll drink you dry, right in front of him, just to watch him watch you die. Dominic lunged. I didn't run for the safe room. I didn't scream. In a moment of pure, reckless clarity, I realized that synthesizing the cure in a lab would take hours we didn't have. My father's journal said the process of extracting the enzyme was fatal, but it didn't say anything about the raw, unfiltered source. As Dominic closed the distance, I grabbed a silver dagger from Silas's desk. Without hesitating, I sliced the blade deep across the palm of my left hand. The pain was sharp, bright, and immediate, but I ignored it. I threw myself sideways, dodging Dominic's grasping hands, and practically fell into Silas's lap. Drink! I screamed, pressing my bleeding open palm directly over Silas's mouth. Silas's eyes widened in shock. For a fraction of a second, he tried to turn his head away, his refusal to hurt me fighting against his primal nature. But the scent of my blood, the exact biological lock his poisoned body had been craving for 2 years, overrode his control. His fangs extended, piercing the flesh of my hand. The reaction was explosive. The moment my blood hit his system, a shockwave of energy blasted outward, shattering the remaining glass in the library windows. I gasped as a violent, searing pull drained from my arm. It didn't just feel like losing blood, it felt felt like he was pulling the life force directly from my soul, but I didn't pull away. Beneath me, Silas's body convulsed. The black rotting veins on his neck and chest didn't just recede, they burned away, glowing a bright, furious gold beneath his skin before vanishing entirely. The shattered nerves in his spine reignited. The ruined tissue on the right side of his face smoothed out the horrific burns, healing in real time as the immortal regeneration unblocked by the toxins slammed back into high gear. Dominic froze, the arrogant smirk vanishing from his face as he realized what was happening. "Kill him!" he shrieked to his guards. Silas's good eye snapped open. His milky blind eye was gone, replaced by twin irises of blazing, icy blue fire. He ripped his mouth away from my hand, his fangs stained crimson. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the cliffside estate, Silas stood up. The wheelchair was kicked aside, smashing into pieces against the wall. He was a foot taller than Dominic, radiating an aura of pure, unadulterated apex predator. "You are in my house," Silas whispered, his voice echoing with ancient, terrifying power. Before Dominic's guards could even raise their weapons, Silas crossed the room. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. He drove his hand straight through the chest of the first guard, ripping his heart out in a single fluid motion. The second guard turned to flee, but Silas grabbed him by the jaw and snapped his neck so violently the sound echoed like a gunshot. Dominic backed up, panic flooding his eyes. He drew a silver sword, but Silas caught the blade with his bare hand. The silver seared his flesh, but Silas didn't blink. He wrenched the sword away, grabbed Dominic by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "Tell the Canadians," Silas said coldly. "The king is healed." With a brutal twist, Silas tore Dominic's head from his shoulders. The rogue's body crumpled to the floor, turning to ash as it fell. The silence that descended upon the library was heavy, broken only by my ragged breathing. I tried to stand, but the room tilted violently. The amount of blood he had taken in those few seconds was staggering. My knees buckled. Before I could hit the floor, Silas was there. His arms caught me, strong and impossibly warm. "Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling as he cradled me against his chest. I looked up at his face. The scars were gone. He was breathtakingly flawless, his striking features fully restored, but his eyes were filled with absolute terror for me. "You're okay," I mumbled, my eyelids drooping heavily. The edges of my vision were fading to black. "Stay with me," he pleaded, pressing his hand against the wound on my palm, his newly healed blood mixing with mine to seal the cut. "You saved me, Clara. Do not die on me now. That is an order." I managed a weak, exhausted smile. "You can't order me around anymore." I let my eyes close, the exhaustion pulling me under the last thing I felt being the Vampire King holding me, as if I was the most precious thing in the world. I didn't wake up all at once. Consciousness returned to me in slow, heavy waves, accompanied by the scent of rain cedar and something intensely, wonderfully warm. I opened my eyes, expecting to see the harsh, clinical lights of the medical bay, or worse, the ruined ceiling of the library. Instead, I found myself buried under a mountain of charcoal gray silk sheets, in a bed large enough to fit 5 people. The room was bathed in the soft, silver glow of the moon, filtering through towering bay windows. A heavy, grounding weight rested beside me. I turned my head, my neck stiff, and the breath caught in my throat. Silas was sitting on the edge of the mattress watching me. The wheelchair was gone. The heavy back braces were gone. He wore only a loose pair of dark trousers, the moonlight tracing the flawless, muscular lines of his chest and shoulders. The horrific, jagged scars that had once webbed across his right side had vanished entirely, leaving behind pristine, pale skin that looked as though it were carved from marble. His face was a masterpiece of aristocratic angles, sharp jawlines, and 2 piercing, icy blue eyes that held an intensity so profound it made my heart stutter. He looked like a god of war who had just stepped off a battlefield, completely untouched by the carnage. "You've been unconscious for 3 days, he said. His voice was no longer a broken rasp. It was a rich, dark baritone that sent a shiver straight down my spine. I tried to push myself up, but a wave of dizziness hit me. Instantly, Silas's hands were on my shoulders, his grip gentle but unyielding as he guided me back against the pillows. "Don't move," he commanded softly. "Your body is still synthesizing the transfusion." "Transfusion?" I mumbled, looking down at my left hand. The deep gash I had made with the silver dagger was gone, replaced by a smooth, faint white line. Then I noticed my pulse. It felt different, thicker, hotter. "Silas, what did you do?" He exhaled a slow, shaky breath, running a hand through his dark hair. "You gave me too much, Clara. The enzyme in your blood destroyed the neurotoxin, but the extraction pulled nearly half the blood from your veins. Your heart stopped before I could even get you out of the library." A cold spike of panic hit me. "But I'm alive." "You're alive because I gave you mine," he said, his blue eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, possessive gravity. "I fed you from my own wrist. Immortal blood is a powerful regenerative. It restarted your heart and rebuilt your cellular structure." I stared at at him, the reality of what he was saying sinking in. In the lore of the underground vampire syndicates, an exchange of blood between a vampire and a human wasn't a medical procedure. It was a binding, a permanent, unbreakable soul tie. "You bound us," I whispered. "I saved you," he corrected his voice, dropping to a low, territorial rumble. He leaned closer, the heat radiating off his skin, wrapping around me like a blanket. "I would have burned this entire city to the ground before I let you die for my sake. But yes, Clara, the bond is real. You are a part of me now, and I am a part of you." I closed my eyes, feeling the steady, thrumming rhythm in my veins. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel captive. For the first time since my father died, I felt completely, utterly safe. "Dominic," I asked, opening my eyes. "Ash," Silas replied dismissively. "Gideon and Thomas purged the rest of his mercenaries. The estate is secure, but the war isn't over. Dominic was just a blunt instrument. The architect behind this, the one who bought the toxin from Beatrice and orchestrated the siege, is still sitting on my council." Lord Ashford, I recalled the name Thomas had shouted during the attack. Silas's jaw tightened, his fangs grazing his lower lip in a flash of predatory anger. "Ashford has controlled the inner council since my injury. He convinced them I was weak, a dying relic unfit to rule. He thought Dominic would finish me off, leaving the throne empty for him to claim. Tonight, the council convenes here at the estate. They expect to find my ashes." He reached out his cool fingers, gently tracing the line of my jaw, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of pure fire straight to my core. "They demanded a bride, Clara," Silas murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. "Tonight I will give them a queen. If you are ready to stand beside me." I didn't hesitate. I reached up, weaving my fingers into his dark hair, and pulled his face down to mine. The kiss was explosive. It held months of his repressed agony, years of my grief, and the undeniable magnetic pull of the blood humming between us. He kissed me with a desperate, crushing intensity, his arms wrapping around my waist to pull me flush against his chest. I felt the sheer, terrifying power coiled within him, but I wasn't afraid of the monster anymore. The monster was mine. "I'm ready," I breathed against his lips. "Let's show them. The king is back." The great hall of the Montgomery estate was a cavernous, cathedral-like space designed to intimidate. Massive stained-glass windows depicted the violent history of the vampire syndicates, while a massive, roaring fire illuminated the long, obsidian council table. I stood on the landing of the grand staircase, hidden in the shadows of the upper gallery, watching the council arrive. There were 12 of them, the oldest, wealthiest, and most lethal predators on the West Coast. They wore tailored Italian suits and diamond-studded gowns, sipping blood-laced champagne as if they hadn't just orchestrated a coup. At the head of the table stood Lord Ashford. He was a tall, aristocratic vampire with slicked-back blonde hair and a smug, self-satisfied smile. He was already acting like the king, giving orders to the estate guards, completely unaware that Gideon and Thomas had locked down all the exits. I looked down at myself. Silas had arranged for a dress that was a weapon in its own right. It was a sweeping gown of midnight black velvet, the bodice structured like armor, with a deep crimson silk lining that trailed behind me like spilled blood. Around my neck rested a heavy, antique diamond choker, the crest of the Montgomery family. Below, Ashford raised his glass, clinking a silver spoon against it to demand silence. "Members of the Northwest Court," Ashford began, his voice dripping with faux sorrow. "We gather tonight under a shroud of tragedy. I have received word that rogue Canadian factions breached these walls yesterday. I fear our beloved King Silas has finally succumbed to his horrific afflictions." Murmurs rippled through the vampires. Some looked genuinely shocked. Others, Ashford's loyalists, hid their smirks behind their crystal flutes. "Silas was broken," Ashford continued, pacing around the head of the table. "He was a crippled shadow of a monarch relying on a fragile human girl just to survive. It is a mercy that he has been put out of his misery. Now we must look to the future. We must elect a new—" "You always were a terrible public speaker, Ashford." The voice echoed through the great hall, like thunder, freezing every vampire in the room. The absolute authority in the tone carried a physical weight, forcing a suffocating silence over the council. The heavy oak double doors beneath the balcony swung open. Silas walked in. The reaction was instantaneous and chaotic. Glass shattered as goblets were dropped. Several council members physically recoiled, tripping over their chairs in sheer terror. He didn't just look healed, he looked lethal. Dressed in a flawless black three-piece suit, he moved with the predatory grace of a panther. There was no limp, there was no hesitation. The scars that had defined his ruin were entirely gone, his face a perfect, terrifying mask of cold fury. Ashford's face drained of what little color it possessed. "Silas, my king, the reports, we thought—" You thought your Canadian lapdog Dominic would finish the job you were too cowardly to do yourself? Silas interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper as he stalked toward the table. You bought a biological weapon created by a human Ashford. You poisoned your king, and then you invited rogues into our territory. Lies! Ashford shouted, panic breaking his composed facade. He looked frantically at the other council members. He is using dark magic. The human girl, she's a witch. She hexed him. Guards, seize him. 6 heavily armed enforcers loyal to Ashford stepped forward, drawing silver-coated blades. Silas didn't even break his stride. He moved so fast the human eye couldn't track him. In a blur of violent motion, he snapped the wrist of the first guard, took his blade and drove it through the chests of the next 3 before they could even blink. The remaining 2 guards dropped their weapons and fell to their knees in absolute submission. Silas stopped directly in front of Ashford. The traitorous lord backed away, his hands trembling until his back hit the stone fireplace. You demanded a bride, Silas said, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the hall. You demanded I prove my strength. Look up, Ashford. All eyes turned to the grand staircase. I stepped out of the shadows, the black velvet of my gown sweeping against the marble steps. I kept my chin high, my posture rigid, projecting a cold, untouchable confidence as I descended the stairs. I could feel the eyes of the deadliest predators in the city on me, but I didn't flinch. I walked straight past the trembling council members and took my place at Silas's side. Silas reached out, taking my hand and pulling me flush against him. This is Clara Harrington, Silas declared, his icy blue eyes burning as he scanned the room. She did not hex me. She bled for me. She cured the poison you cowardly paid for. She carries my blood in her veins, and she stands under my absolute protection. He turned his gaze back to Ashford. You wanted a king, Ashford? You have one. Silas's hand shot out, wrapping around Ashford's throat. The traitor gagged, kicking his legs as Silas lifted him entirely off the floor with one arm. Treason is paid in ash, Silas whispered. With a sickening crunch, Silas crushed Ashford's windpipe, plunging his other hand directly into the vampire's chest and tearing out his heart. Ashford's body immediately began to desiccate, crumbling into grey dust before it even hit the floor. Silas dropped the blackened heart onto the pristine obsidian table. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his hands, and looked at the remaining council members. Does anyone else wish to challenge my health or my queen? As one, the 11 remaining vampires dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in absolute terrified submission. Silas turned to me, the cold fury in his eyes melting instantly into a warm, possessive devotion. He brought my hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles where the faint white scar rested. The war for the Montgomery Syndicate was over, but there was still one piece of business left to handle. We have a flight to catch, Silas murmured, his eyes flashing with a dark, vengeful promise. It's time to visit your stepmother. The Harrington estate in Seattle looked exactly the same as it had when I was cast out, but the atmosphere was vastly different. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, and the sounds of a string quartet drifted from the open French doors. Beatrice was hosting a gala. She was celebrating her induction into the upper echelons of Seattle's elite, funded entirely by the millions she had made selling my father's lethal neurotoxin to the black market. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city slick and gleaming under the streetlights. Gideon parked the black SUV right at the front steps, blocking in a senator's Mercedes. I stepped out of the car, still wearing the magnificent black velvet gown Silas had given me. Silas stepped out beside me, wearing a tailored black overcoat that made him look like a dark, avenging angel. We didn't bother knocking. Gideon simply kicked the massive mahogany front doors open, splintering the lock. The music ground to a halt. The chatter of 60 wealthy socialites died instantly. Beatrice was standing by the grand staircase wearing a glittering gold dress, holding a glass of champagne. Chloe was beside her, laughing at a joke made by a young tech CEO. When Beatrice saw me, her champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. All the color drained from her perfectly contoured face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Then she saw the man standing next to me. Beatrice had only ever seen Silas Montgomery in the grainy, leaked photos of a ruined, crippled monster. The man standing in her foyer now was flawless, towering, and radiating a terrifying, lethal authority. Clara, Beatrice breathed, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the word. Hello, Beatrice, I said, my voice echoing clearly in the dead, silent room. I let go of Silas's arm and walked slowly across the foyer. The crowd of wealthy humans instinctively parted for me, sensing the danger radiating from the massive enforcer Gideon, who stood by the door, and the king, who watched my every move. How? Chloe whimpered, shrinking behind her mother. He was supposed to... Die, Silas finished for her. He stepped forward, his voice a smooth, cultured purr that carried a lethal edge. You were banking on my death, Mrs. Harrington. You sold William Harrington's research to Lord Ashford, knowing it would be weaponized against me. And then you sent his rightful heir into my home, hoping my madness would drive me to kill her, tying up your loose ends. Murmurs of shock rippled through the gala guests. Many of them were politicians and executives who knew about the vampire syndicates. They knew exactly who Silas was, and they knew the penalty for crossing him. I don't know what you're talking about, Beatrice stammered, stepping back, her eyes darting toward the front door. This is my house. You are trespassing. I will call the police. The chief of police is currently enjoying a cocktail by your ice sculpture, Silas noted dryly, gesturing toward a pale, sweating man in the corner who looked ready to faint. He will not be answering his radio tonight. I stopped a few feet away from Beatrice. She looked small, pathetic. The tyrant who had terrorized me for 5 years was nothing but a cowardly fraud. You forged the registry, I said, my voice cold and steady. You violated the accord to save Chloe, and you sold my father's legacy to murderers. I pulled a thick manila envelope from my clutch and tossed it onto the floor at her feet. It was the same envelope she had given me on my birthday, but the contents were vastly different. What is this? Beatrice asked, her voice cracking. Those are the eviction notices, I replied, and the forensic accounting reports from Biotech Solutions. My father's hidden ledgers prove that the company, this house, and every cent of the Harrington Trust rightfully belongs to me upon my 18th birthday. The Montgomery Syndicate's lawyers have already seized your offshore accounts. Beatrice fell to her knees, frantically tearing open the envelope. As she read the documents, tears of absolute ruin spilled down her cheeks. You have nothing, I said, looking down at her without an ounce of pity. Your bank accounts are frozen. The patents you sold have been seized by the syndicate. This house is mine. Clara, please, Chloe sobbed, dropping to her knees beside her mother, grabbing the hem of my dress. We're family. You can't put us on the street. Where will we go? I looked at the girl I had once protected, realizing she was just as rotten as her mother. You can go anywhere you want, Chloe, but you have 10 minutes to pack before Gideon throws you both out into the rain. I turned my back on them, ignoring Beatrice's wailing and Chloe's pathetic pleas. The socialites were already rushing for the doors, desperate to distance themselves from the ruined Harrington women before the Vampire King's wrath turned on them. I walked back to Silas. He looked incredibly proud, his icy blue eyes shining with a dark, admiring affection. He held out his arm, and I looped mine through it. Are you satisfied, my queen? He asked softly, leading me out of the house and onto the front porch. The cold Seattle air felt incredibly refreshing. More than satisfied, I smiled, leaning my head against his shoulder. Behind us, Gideon began tossing Beatrice's designer luggage out the front door, the heavy bags hitting the wet gravel with a satisfying thud. I had been dragged out of this house as a sacrificial lamb, destined to be a victim to a broken monster. But I had refused to play the victim. I had found the man beneath the scars, cured the poison meant to destroy him, and claimed a power Beatrice could never comprehend. Silas wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close to his warm chest. As we walked toward the waiting car, we were heading back to the cliffside estate, back to the massive library and the crashing waves of the Pacific. It wasn't a prison anymore, it was our kingdom. And as the Vampire King pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to my forehead under the stormy Seattle sky, I knew our reign was just beginning. What an absolute thrill ride! From a sacrificial bride to the undisputed queen of the Northwest Court, Clara's journey proves that sometimes the monsters we fear are the only ones who can truly protect us. Did you expect that twist with the blood bond, or Beatrice's epic downfall at the end? Let me know your favorite moment down in the comments. If you love this story, please smash that like button, share this video with all your friends who love dark romance and vampire drama, and don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so you never miss another original story. See you next time.